Ready? Good morning. We are live for the Astro-Babble. Happy Monday, everyone. I know that this weekend was a little interesting, what with the holiday and the fricking lunar eclipse, so hope y'all navigated that rather well. But we are here for another week, and starting off with 8 more charts that have been donated by you, my lovely followers. Again, that's how we run these. We have 8 pre-run charts that I haven't looked at. We're just going to read them cold, look at what I see, talk about some astrology things. I love to see your comments, your questions. If you would like to be a part of the live streams, feel free to private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time. Also share it with friends, family, people who are also astrology nerds like me, and we'll get you on the live streams as well. If you'd like to schedule a private consult, do something a little bit more one-on-one, we can always have you go to my website, which is scorpiorisingastrology.com. So let's pop open a busy water here and get to reading the charts, shall we? Okay. So, first chart of the day, we have the lovely Karen. My dear, how are you? Karen has an Aquarius ascendant, ruled by her Saturn in Aries retrograde in the 3rd. That's a little bit of an issue, Karen, and I'm not a fan of that. Oh, okay. So you've decided to make your chart just a little bit challenging. Just a little bit challenging in a couple different ways. Heart of Gold, by the way, Karen. Absolutely lovely. I'm such a fan of your moon in Cancer in the 6th house of work. You know, you really pour absolutely everything you have, sometimes to your detriment, into what you do for a living. This moon in Cancer in the 6th is just such a glorious placement for just somebody who's infinitely compassionate. Like, you would do very well in nursing, you would do very well in the healthcare field, with working with animals, always a soft spot for you. Also, we have a little bit of a tendency for emotional eating, because the moon in Cancer, the sign of the stomach in the 6th house of health, does tend to give us that. So that's just something to look at as we explore some of these deeper stress patterns that we're going to talk about. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about this really weird pile-up that you've chosen to demonstrate in your 3rd and your 9th houses. So in your 3rd house, you have the ruler of your chart, which is Saturn, which is a little bit more problematic, especially in earlier years. You know, Saturn tends to make us a little bit more down, a little bit heavier, a little bit more weak, especially y'all, it's Monday. Especially in earlier life, until we hit that first Saturn return, and that Saturn doesn't just mature, but your entire chart matures. You really level up at 30, and likewise around 60 as that second Saturn return takes place. But the ruler of your chart is also compromised. He's backwards, he's retrograde, and in the sign of his detriment, posing his exaltation in Libra, he's in Aries, which is the sign that he least likes to be in. And you've also put that Lord in your 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. So it would not surprise me if teaching is something that you feel very called to do. However, especially earlier years, there was this story that you wove into your experience of not being enough. You've put the North Node in Aries here, so it is something that you're really, really striving towards, and you've gone to school for, and school is really, really difficult for you on so many levels, but it's something that you've really decided to be your crucible this time around, is the idea of education, not just primary education, but secondary education, and really making sure that you can go for the gold scholastically, and that's a huge part of your chart, for sure. What I do like, and what I think is the saving grace for some of your communication, because we have this detrimented Saturn ruling the chart in the 3rd house of communication, which would normally be a not great thing. It would be a placement that I would see a lot in people who had speech impediments or learning disabilities, that kind of stuff. However, you do have this Mercury in Sagittarius conjoin the sun exactly at 15 degrees in your 11th house of friendships. I think that this does make you extremely sociable. I think this does make you a good communicator in a social setting, not necessarily when it comes down to like you being one-on-one writing a paper. That's where things get really difficult. But when we look at the sun conjoin Mercury in Sag, which is a very charismatic sign, and the sun backlighting that Mercury to really give it some jazz hands, that's a beautiful placement for your Mercury to be in, and I really enjoy that. So I think communication is saved based on your pure exuberance, but I do think that, again, scholastically, we need to focus so much on this idea of learning in your chart and letting that be the sole focus of the life, as opposed to other things like, you've got great relationship placements, and you've got great creativity in the chart, you've got some good business sense, you've got good chemistry in the chart. Finances a little bit unpredictable because you're always learning, so like you throwing another couple $100 away on another workshop, another class, another certification, that's always going to make finances a little bit rocky. But hey, it's what you've come here to do. And I think although it's difficult, the fact that you keep coming back to it and keep chipping away is really, really important. And I think in the long run, it's definitely going to serve you well. But it's just about making sure that you can understand that the higher learning aspect of your life is the goal, because then the more you learn, the more you can teach, and the more we can shut up that Saturn, that ruler of the chart, which in earlier life, again, was really, really negative, was really, really frustrated, was really, really hard to express because it's in such a tricky spot. But at the same time, it's still the ruler of the chart, and it still says that in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, co-present with the North Node, you're here to teach us some stuff. And how you do that will be very, very interesting to see how you've overcome. But I think that we also need to acknowledge that moon in Cancer in the 6th for sure. Just make sure that your heart's in it, whatever you choose to do. Yes. And I think that's pretty much it for your chart. Those are really the key themes that I would like to hit on, because I think that's the most important. Oh, wait, hold on. We've got this Venus in Capricorn. She's talking to me. So this Venus in Capricorn in the 12th house of hidden enemies, ruling the 4th house of home and family, definitely gives you this idea of family as being a space of mistrust. Or a space of hidden enemies right off the bat. It's not an ideal spot for you to chill, to find solace, for you to rest or find the ease. The home and the family environment was not a safe space, and I understand that, and I respect that more than you know. We just need to understand that lack of safety was also what propelled you forward. So forgiveness is something that we'll need to kind of interject into that space for sure as you move forward. Okay. And that is it for that chart. Good morning, Lucia. Let's take a peek at chart number 2, which is Gil. Gil, my darling. Let's take a peek at Gil's chart. Oh. Gil, my little Liebchen. We need to talk as well. So here, again, we have a second concept, and this is what I love about the live streams. Like, y'all give me these birth times randomly, right? Randomly. Bunny quotes. But for some reason, the first 2 charts of the live stream have a detrimented ruler. So this is a thing that we need to talk about. When we have the ruler of the chart in a sign that it does not prefer, right? In this case, Gil's chart is ruled by Venus because of her Taurus ascendant, but her Venus is in Aries, the opposite sign of her rulership in Taurus, so she's in the sign of her fall, and it's in the 12th house of hidden enemies. Now, this is made a little bit better by her absolutely brilliant Sun in Aries, which is flawless. It is still in the 12th house, so detrimented ego, detrimented chart ruler. We have this really strong sense of needing to heal. We have this really, especially with that Venus opposing retrograde Neptune in Libra in the 6th. Like, the idea of healing the healer is going to be very, very important for Gil. Yeah, and also, that Mars in Aries, Gil, making an exact trine to your Venus. Ooh, you, like, healthcare for sure. Yes, healing. So for those of you who need a little bit of kind of astrology 101, so the 6th house and the 12th house are our major healing houses. And so when we find the 6th house of health and the 12th house of hospitalizations, placing the chart ruler there, immediately I start to think of somebody who should be in the healthcare industry, as well as Venus, the ruler of the chart, ruling the 6th house of health from the 12th. I think that this is definitely a healthcare chart for sure, but I think that the themes are deeper than that, because this Venus in Aries is making an opposition to Neptune in Libra, and there's this idea of, like, you'd be an excellent anesthesiologist just because, just because of the medication aspect with Neptune putting people to sleep. I see it for you. But then also this Mars and Sagittarius in the 8th house of business, taxes, estates, it's such a strong entrepreneurship placement to put a trine to your chart ruler. I think the idea of you going off on your own, having a home healthcare business would be absolutely flawless, especially with that Sun in Aries in the 12th ruling the 4th house of home, Pluto being there, which is a very transformational planet, and your super psychic moon in Pisces up in the 11th. Tricky that Mercury in Pisces, though, conjunct the MC. I think. Oh, okay. I see how this might play out in the life. So let me give you a scenario, Gil. Because you've put so much emphasis on houses that are unstable. Yeah, constantly transiting, constantly in a state of homeostasis. Yeah, they're fluctuating from one end of the spectrum to another, trying to find balance, but balance isn't a fixed state. It's a fluid state. Yeah, and this Pisces moon especially, if you're not acknowledging your emotions, that can get very, very messy very, very quick. But at the same time, this Mercury in Pisces in the 11th really does start to muddy your language and muddy your communication. It really does start to, as you walk people through their own healing journey, and as you walk through your healing journey, the idea of your words getting very loose, very fluid, overly so, as well as the emotions overtaking the mind, that can be something that's a little bit more of detriment than I would like to see. Now, we do have a mutual reception between... Oh, that's a saving grace. That's a saving grace, though. Okay, I like that. So it's not as bad as I just made it out to be. Again, we're reading these charts cold, so I kind of need to see things as I see them. But the idea of me retracting that statement just a little bit, because Mercury in Pisces is in mutual reception to Jupiter, the most positive planet of any chart, in Gemini through the 6th house of finance. I think that's absolutely flawless. Yeah, you actually teaching spirituality to your friends groups, your social circles, you being a little bit more of a spiritual advocate. Like, you working in a hospital is one thing, but you also getting a minister's license and becoming a hospital chaplain as well in your off time would be a thing for you. Yeah, so you work in medicine, but you also work in like grief counseling, from a spiritual perspective. Like that would also be very, very appropriate for you, like way too appropriate. If you're not doing that, I would encourage it, because that would also help to express your Pisces moon. That would also really help to tap you into the liminal of your chart, and really help to dig deep into some of those harder healing lessons. North Node in the 9th house, travel, spirituality. Yep, okay, I see it. Yeah, it's all coming together. Yeah. Balancing medicine and spirituality. And that's such a 12th house thing. That's such a 12th house thing. It's the house of karmic healing. It's where people go to physically heal, but also spiritually heal, and you put so much emphasis on that side of your chart. Like, yeah, I get it. It's a thing. If you need help with boundaries, if you need help channeling some of those spiritual energies, if you need help to corral all of these gifts into one kind of central location, we might be able to work with some Jupiter Pisces remediation in your chart as well as Mercury. Mercury is known for not just healing work, but also traversing the realms, as it was. Let's talk a little bit about relationships, because you have this retrograde Saturn in Scorpio in the 7th. In relationships, I think the one thing that you need to be aware of is lying. Scorpio tends to keep things hidden. Saturn is a very repressed planet in general, but he's also backwards. So the idea of putting that in your relationship house, we need to be very aware that your relationships tend to be, your chosen partners tend to be a little bit more secretive than is actually healthy. Yeah, so that's just something to be aware of. I think especially because they might be involved in a field, especially with the 9th house, that you wouldn't necessarily understand. They might be traveling a lot for work, etc., and would not feel the need to share that. That does not give them the right to withdraw to such a degree, because when I see this Saturn and Scorpio retrograde in the 7th, it's somebody who literally just cloisters. It's somebody who literally just shuts down, ices you out, and that's a theme that we wouldn't necessarily want in a relationship. And your Pisces moon is uniquely equipped to help navigate those waters, but I think that the degree and the density of the partner that you've chosen to be so hidden, so frigid, would be a good way to say it. You're attracted to somebody who's deep, who's intense, who's spiritual. Yeah, but if they overemphasize that Saturn in their life, and they really start to pull back, to become fearful or scared, then that's something that unfortunately you can't fix in them. Yeah. So we just need to be kind of aware of that dynamic as well. Okay, thank you, Gil, for donating your chart. That was super fun. Let's take chart number 3. How are we doing on time, by the way? We're doing good on time. We're right on time. Okay, chart number 3, Michelle, darling. Okay, let's take a peek at Michelle's chart. So we've got a Cancer ascendant with the moon in Aquarius, Mars in Aquarius, about to conjoin in the 8th house of business. Okay. Mars separating from a trine with Uranus in Libra. Scorpio stellium in the 5th. Very fun. Oh, with a Venus and Scorpio opposing Saturn and Taurus retrograde. 3 retrograde Saturns in our charts this morning. Interesting. Mercury Cazimi in Scorpio as well in the 5th. Come on, chart, tell me where to go. Where am I going first? Let's see. North Node in Pisces, connected to the Jupiter in Libra. Where are we going, chart? You're giving me a lot of details, but not a lot of substance. Okay, so we need to start with the children things first, the children's sexuality. Okay, so let's talk about this Scorpio stellium first, Michelle. So the fact that you've put so much emphasis on the 5th house, we need to understand what the 5th house represents. We have your Venus, your Mercury, your Sun, who are conjunct, as well as your Neptune, all in Scorpio in the 5th house of children, sexuality, parenting, yeah, and creativity. Those are the four things that this fifth house rules. So there's a really strong emphasis on those themes in your life in general. The idea of your ego being very brought to light should you have children. That's definitely a thing. But also, this Venus in Scorpio is tricky because Venus in Scorpio is in her fall. She does not like to be in Scorpio. I refer to Venus in Scorpio as the exiled princess, because she's kind of kicked out of her kingdom and she's having to live her life alone in the woods, roughing it, and that's a very big part of that fifth house dynamic. So I think the idea of you healing abandonment issues is definitely something that's going to need to take some of your consideration throughout the life, if it hasn't already taken a lot of your consideration throughout the life. That's something that we need to just be aware of, for sure. Let's see. But this Mercury Cazimi, let's see. Where do some of these planets rule? Yeah. Okay. So Mercury Cazimi, ruling the third house of writing, teaching, communication. That's lovely. Whereas Gemini in the charts, Gemini is going to be the 12th house of healing. You'd be very good as a sex educator. You really, really would. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is your Cancer ascendant being ruled by the moon in Aquarius conjunct Mars in the 8th. And that's going to be the idea of you being just hypersensitive emotionally and just very in tune with the feelings of others, but also being able to detach via that Aquarius, and charge ahead with that Mars and just say, hey, look, I know that this is a really tricky topic. I know that this is a very sensitive topic. I know that you're not used to talking about this, but we gotta. Yeah. And same thing, with that fifth house being the house of sexuality, Scorpio being a very sexual sign in general, and that Mars in Aquarius in the 8th house of business ruling your fifth house of sexuality as well. I think that would be an excellent field for you to get into, because it really would take a lot of those communication principles with the Mercury Cazimi ruling the third, and that Pluto in Virgo as well in the third, really bring about some of the exposing tendencies of your Scorpio sun, and really say, Scorpio in general likes to get to the root of things, likes to get to the underbelly of what's hidden, and sex is one of those topics that our society has chosen to repress in a very real way, especially with that Venus in Scorpio ruling Saturn in Taurus retrograde in the 11th house of friendships, you bringing some of these social themes to light and creating some very practical, useful, but also, straightforward dialogues about what it means to be a being who has a reproductive tendency, and also to honor your own reproductive tendencies via having children of your own. So yeah, that's a huge thing for your chart. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Fourth house of family is really interesting. Again, we have that victim mentality coming forward. Wouldn't surprise me if you, one of the things that I see in the chart are redemption arcs. Yeah. So as we start to unpack the life story, we really start to see kind of where somebody is choosing to heal. And one of the things that you're choosing to heal is your generation. And the idea of you specifically having children this go around. They don't need to be yours by blood, but having children in order to heal the wounds of the family. Because of this Jupiter in Libra, Uranus in Libra being ruled by Venus in Scorpio. Now, the one thing that you need to make sure is that your own issues do not transfer to the next generation that you choose to rear, and that would probably be my biggest concern. And one of the ways that I think that you'll overcome that is by really channeling some of the deeper, darker themes and being upfront with it. Yeah, bring it into the light, Michelle. Bring it into the light. Not that the light is always a good place to be. Sometimes things are supposed to be dark and hidden and mysterious, and that's okay too. We just need to make sure that that balance gets struck. Yeah, super entrepreneurial streaks. I love it. You earning lots of money from the fifth house of children, sexuality, creativity, as well. Like if you don't work as a sex educator or work with children, I think you specifically going into business for yourself and using some of your creative energy, especially some of your darker Scorpio creative energy, would be a very good move for you. You could go into creative writing. That might be a thing. With that Mercury Cazimi ruling the third, you have a lot of career options, a lot of different ways to channel that energy. And that's something that I work with clients on a lot is, what's my path? What should I do for a living? And in some charts, that's a little bit more crystal clear than others, but it's always about leveraging your strengths. Yeah, and your strengths just happen to be very fifth house centric. So if we look at, the spectrum of what that could be everything from actual sex work as therapy, to teaching children about sexual education, to opening up that fifth house of creativity, some of the creative writing stuff, writing an erotic novel, those kinds of things. But we always want to incorporate some of the reproductive, some of the creative, some of the deeper, darker themes of Scorpio in the fifth house regardless. I think for you, if you do start to question life's purpose, if you do start to question, like especially with this Capricorn ruling your seventh house of relationships, like if things start to get a little bit too heavy for you, the place that you can always really run to for groundedness is your friendship circle. That Saturn in Taurus retrograde is the most grounded placement that we can have in a chart, and you've really created this rock for your friends to be in your life. So I think that if for some reason you feel out of focus, if you feel a little bit too sensitive, if you feel a little bit too triggered at any point in time, really just call up a friend, like phone a friend. You've chosen some really good ones. And I think that the longer friends, especially the ones who have been in your life for longer, the ones who have matured, those are really going to be the ones to give you some really solid advice. Excellent. Cool. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate you. Let's take a peek at our next chart, which is going to be Taryn. Taryn, how are you, my darling? Okay. Oh, we have a Leo ascendant. That's fun. Haven't had one of those in a bit. So Leo ascendant with Sun in the ninth, making us almost exact sextile to the Moon in Gemini. That's fun. I could get behind that. Okay. So Taryn, with your your Mars is in Aries. Oh goodness, Lord have mercy. Okay, so we've got some fire in the chart. Just a little bit of fire. A lot of fire. But so we have this Leo ascendant, which brings the Sun's quality already, and then we have the Sun ruling the chart from the ninth in Aries. So the idea of ninth house topics are going to be very important for you, Taryn. So those ninth house topics are going to include spirituality, travel, foreigners, and higher education. So you specifically being very, very attracted to travel, working abroad, studying overseas, but also delving into spiritual depths. All of those things are going to be intensely attractive to you. Oh, and I see you've made it difficult in certain ways as well. So we've got this Mars in Libra retrograde in the third, opposing the Sun in Aries in the ninth. How do we process that? The minute that you try to actually dull your fire by entering a formal teaching environment, Taryn, not necessarily a fan of it. I'm not a fan of it. You would be great as a life coach. You would be great as a life coach, not as an ethics professor. Does that make sense? So when we look at the ninth house of higher education and your Sun in Aries being here, it's an immediate success placement, like super strong, great energy there, fabulous. However, when we go into the third house of teaching, which is often primary education, through high school, really, first 18 years of life education, and then we see this Mars in Libra retrograde, which is Mars in a sign he doesn't like to be in his fall, and going backwards. Plus Saturn is here. Saturn is in his exaltation, but still retrograde. Pluto's here as well. There's a lot of heaviness in the teaching space for you. I would not be a teacher. I just wouldn't. I think it's going to be way too difficult for you, way too draining. You might do it well to a certain degree, but it's not going to be fulfilling, and it's just going to grate you like nothing grates you in your life. Because you really want to use that Sun in Aries to like burst forward and to not just burst forward, but like take other people with you. Like you really want to take this fireball that you have in the 9th house of higher education, and you want to take it as far as it's going to go, for sure. And the way that you do that is through this sextile with the moon in Gemini in the 11th. Like you're here to spread your knowledge with friends. Like you're that person in the coffee shops of old who's standing on chairs, like spouting the latest philosophical nonsense that you picked up in a book somewhere and changing people's lives just because that's what you're passionate about. Like your passion is so infectious. It's glorious. And the minute that you try to dampen that to a curriculum, the minute that you try to conform to a higher education standard of what needs to be taught or what is appropriate, that sun is going to feel very, very suppressed. That sun's just going to feel suppressed. It's just kind of the way it is. So we want to keep that sun bright. We want to keep that sun lit. We want to keep that sun on fire. And the way that we do that is by not teaching. You can teach, just not through conventional means. Like, don't let the school system steal that radiance from you, honey. Because I think that it's so easy for you to succumb to these harsher placements. You know, you have 2 malefics, both of them retrograde in your 3rd house of communication. That's tricky. That's tricky business. But if you let your sun shine, if you let all that light out, if you really start to become this passionate force that's able to move people, like you are a mover and a shaker. You are a leader, especially in spirituality, higher education, travel, foreigners. Like that topic of your 9th house is going to be so important for you. The more you lean on that, the easier, more effortless, and more fulfilling your life is going to be, darling. But if you start to take the easy road, if you start to take the practical road, if you start to succumb to the rules or supposed rules of the situation, you know, rules are just a construct. They're just agreed upon terms. But if they don't suit your strengths, honey, leave them behind. So yeah, that's really the big thing that I would like to say to you. Yeah, like on the bottom half of your chart, we've got retrograde, 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 retrograde station. You know, Mars, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, all stuck, all really hard. You know, the minute that you try to get too personal, the minute that you slow down to rest, it really starts to get very heavy, very dense, very secretive, very unpredictable, very quick. But if you use that passion, if you use that passion, if you channel that passion in a way that's actually super motivating to other people, I think that that's going to be the ultimate strength of your chart. Let's look into relationships. I like the relationships that you've chosen. You know, this Venus in Aquarius is somebody you're attracted to somebody who's very intellectual, but also beautiful at the same time. You know, somebody who has an eye for fashion, who's a little bit quirky, but definitely, you know, is good at what they do, and has an innate intelligence that I think is gorgeous. So that's fine. I have no issues with that whatsoever. North Node in Cancer, you know, we're here to heal, we're here to learn how to fix, we're here to delve into the subconscious. You know, it would definitely benefit you to study some psychology. It would definitely benefit you to study some coping mechanisms. It would definitely benefit you to study like addiction recovery, you know, healing from both physical and mental emotional trauma that causes physical trauma, that kind of stuff. Like that would be excellent for you as you decide where it is you would like to go. I think those skills would help you very, very much. And yeah, I think that's about it. Taryn, thank you so much for your chart, and we will touch base and see what's going on. Okay, so we are just done with chart number 4. We're halfway through. We're at about 30 minutes. Excellent. I'm on time. Just as a reminder, if you would like to submit your chart for the list, for the live streams, just private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add you to the queue. The queue is rather long, but please be patient, and I will message you when your chart is featured. Likewise, if you'd like to work one-on-one, maybe learn some astrology, you can always visit my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com. Okay, so that's my little plug. Let's move on to chart number 5, which is Terry. And good morning, Miss Andromeda. I see you on Instagram. You're very welcome. Cheers. Okay, so let's talk about Terry. Terry has Virgo North Node, Virgo Ascendant, Pluto Virgo. Mercury in Aries in the 8th. Another very entrepreneurship tendency. Venus in Aries, very prove it to me mentality. Oh, but a bleeding heart, Moon in Cancer. Sun in Taurus, very practical. I like the hodgepodge. You've balanced yourself very well, my dear. The one thing that we're really missing in the chart is air, but I think the Mercury rulership and Virgo kind of make up for that a little bit. It's been really rough. If you have children, it's been really rough in the children department. It's also been really rough in the creativity department, for sure. With all the Capricorn transits moving through your 5th house, like that's been tricky. It's been a major stressor. So I'd give yourself a little bit of slack with that, because that astrology is not going to move through your 5th house of children until December. And then you'll get some breathing room in that department, which will be nice. The more I look at your chart, the more I'm seeing 2 layers. So there are 2 layers to your chart, Terry. The layer that you kind of came in with, and the layer that you're growing into. The feeling that I'm getting from your chart, and I'm like, tell me if you get this. It's like you were born. It's like you were a hermit crab who was born into a shell that was too big. Yeah, that's the feeling that I'm getting from you. And I think that a lot of it is it's a subtle feeling. Yeah, like at first it might have been too constricting, because we've got this Virgo tendency, and we've got this Mercury and Virgo Venus, or this Mercury and Aries, Venus and Aries up in the 8th house of business. Like the idea of you trying to break through, bust through, can't wait, gotta go, do, prove it to me, you know, I'm better, I'm this, anything you can do, I can do better, you know, very, very driven first part of the life. But as you matured, and as you started to realize what it was that actually made life tick, which for you it was actually developing and is still about developing a solid personality. You know, this North Node in the 1st house, you're really here to cultivate you. You're really here to grow as a person, to accumulate life experience, to put your flag in the sand. Like, you're really here to make a name for yourself and to really claim who it is you are as a person, which is a very unique life path choice, and I'm here for it. I really enjoy it. I just think that for you specifically, the more that you age, and the more you start to realize what life is actually about, the more you start to realize, wow, you know, I was trying to break through in my early life so hard that I didn't realize how big life is, like how you never really get it done, how there's so much to life, there's so much that is unconquerable, and really even like to the degree that you start to realize that it's not just about sheer force of will. A lot of it is about circumstance. A lot of it is about the cards that you were dealt. A lot of it was and is health stuff and things that are outside of your control. And you can do a lot of things in this life, but there are also some things that, the deck was just stacked against you, and you really have to understand that, like, like with everything politically that's going on right now, like being born into a female body, being born into the skin of somebody of color, like, there are privileges that you were either given or not given, and that can be really detrimental. And that's not to say that you shouldn't charge forward regardless, but I think that for you specifically, like, you were fighting so hard in the beginning, and then as you start to kind of chill and mellow, and you start to understand that, like, wow, the more I fight, the more I get done, but sometimes it's not about fighting. Sometimes it's about the long game. Sometimes it's about playing chess, not checkers, not jumping over all the pieces, but strategically coming up with a plan that leverages strengths and minimizes weaknesses, because there is such a thing as strengths and weaknesses. It's not just all sheer force of will, Terry, and the devil really is in the details. So that's a really interesting thing that you've done with your chart. I think this Mars in Pisces is fascinating because it's slightly distracting. Your partner, a partner that you choose, has a very watery, fiery dynamic, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were a big old Cancer. Because Cancer is that cardinal water sign, and it embodies both fire and water together. And you've got this Mars in Pisces, fiery planet, watery sign in the seventh house of relationships. So you're very attracted to somebody who is sensitive, somebody who is a little bit mushy, a little bit soft, but who also has that kind of driven edge. Unfortunately, they succumb to their own water in the end, as they do. And they talk a good game, but at the end of the day, they're still a feely blob of mush. And that's difficult when you have that Venus and Aries being ruled by that Mars, because you're constantly trying to push your partner to grow. But what your partner doesn't want to do necessarily is grow more than they have to. And I think it's counterbalancing for you. I think it's glorious that you choose somebody who is in some ways kind of slowing you down, and reminding you that you don't need to go so fast all the time, because life isn't necessarily about the rush. And it'll really help you tap into your Cancer moon. This Cancer moon in the 11th, it is a very social placement. It is a very empathic placement. And I think in early life especially, you tried to suppress that, and you tried to, because, a Cancer moon, the feelings weigh you down, darling. They really, really weigh you down. And I'm not sure that that's going to be like super easy for you to channel in your earlier years. But as you got older, and as you really started to unlock those emotional levels, I think it's actually one of your greatest strengths, is how sensitive you are. But you can't be sensitive and aggressive and driven at the same time. It's that idea of the yin yang, right? The more active you are, the more rushing you are, the faster you go, the less time you have for things like rest and reflection and rejuvenation and empathy. Yeah, but the more empathic you are, the slower you are, the more restful, the more creative you are, the slower you go, because you can't embody both of those extremes at the same time. And kind of go full tilt like you like to do, for sure. So there's that. Yeah, I think we covered a lot, Terry. Thank you. Thank you for donating your chart to science. Let's take a quick peek at time. Okay, now we need to go to Vanita. Vanita, my darling, how are you? Another Virgo ascendant. This time, Virgo is also in Aries. Virgo. Mercury is also in Aries, in the 8th house, just like the last chart. But there is a different schema in this chart that I think is interesting. See, this is what I really enjoy about looking at these charts, because our last chart had this hyper-driven tendency that needed to be kind of slowed down and watered down, and here we have a much more even balance to the chart. We have the Virgo ascendant with the Mercury in Aries in the 8th, which again, those entrepreneurship tendencies, very, very strong. Mercury rules the 3 M's, magic, money, and medicine. And to have a Mercury in Aries, that sign of the leader, charging forward and really bringing all of those 8th house business topics to fruition, I think that that's glorious, Vanita. I think that, your passion is unparalleled. However, we also have this super watery sun and moon, a sun and a moon both in Pisces, not necessarily a new moon, but getting very, very close. This brings such a heaviness to the heart, so much water, so much feeling, so little boundaries, darling. There's a lot here that needs to be worked with and unpacked. Pisces sun, Pisces moon makes you extremely intuitive to a fault. Super empathic, and not necessarily in a helpful way. It's something that it's a set of rules that very few people teach you, and you really need to have a watery mentor, somebody who's able to coach you how to navigate those emotions, because unless there was somebody in your life who really taught you the rules of the water signs, then those emotions are really going to spill in very inconvenient places, like a wine stain that just makes things rather muddy and uncomfortable. So if you were to master those feelings, I think that it's great. However, if you're still having trouble with that, we might need to talk about how we can work with those things. So the sun and the moon being in Pisces in the 7th house, however, really does bring out this idea of relationships being super important to Vanita, almost to the level that her ego depends on it. One of the things that I would like to caution you about, my dear, is relationships tending to steal your power. And they won't do this intentionally, but water conforms to the vessel in which it is placed. And so you pour yourself into this other person or other people, and you realize that you take on the shape that they are, and you lose your own shape. But water really doesn't have a shape. It conforms. And so that's something that we need to be a little bit wary of, is we have this tendency to surrender a little bit too much, especially when it comes into relationship dynamics. And at its worst, you'll sacrifice your own emotions because the only emotions that matter are your partner's. And so their heart becomes your heart, but your heart never disappears. It just gets locked away somewhere. And so when that relationship ends and all of your feelings come to the surface, you realize, oh my gosh, I literally gave myself away again. And that can be a very interesting and difficult dynamic. However, we do have Jupiter in Capricorn in the 5th house, ruling the 7th. So the idea that children will come from the relationship, I think that's a good thing for you, especially very grounding thing. And your children have the potential to be rather famous because of that Saturn and Gemini ruling the 5th house. And I think that there is a dynamic here that you're here to give them a legacy. Not just a last will with some money attached. Like, you're here to really set them up for greatness, and I think that that's a beautiful expression of your chart as well. Let's see. Now we do have this interesting combo of Venus in Taurus and Mars in Taurus in the 9th, ruling the 3rd house of communication. Ruling the 2nd house of finance, ruling the 8th house of business, and yes. And where's Libra? 2nd house, 3rd house, and then we're looking at Taurus in the 9th, and then Aries in the 8th. Okay, so I think that one of the things that you would actually be really, really good at is creative writing, teaching business, You would also be very good at ninth house topics like travel, foreigners, higher education, spirituality. But again, that idea of teaching, that Mars and Taurus ruled by Venus and then ruling the third house, that does make you a pretty good teacher, especially with Mercury ruling the chart, like your ability to both inspire through words, but also to use your words and have that silver tongue, like that is somebody who has that Virgo ascendant, very, very prominent, if your emotions stay out of the way. Now, if your emotions do get in the way, then everything becomes a waterlogged mess. So there is this need for slight separation from the emotional department, and making sure that those energies stay a little bit separated. Not completely separated, because the emotions feel the work, but to understand that there is a logical, rational, drier side to your chart, and then there's this like super wet, succumby side to the chart, where you really just succumb, surrender, default, melt into that seventh house of relationships, which doesn't really serve you in a more driven, active, action-oriented role of the career side. Okay, cool. Benita, thank you so much for donating your chart to science. Good morning, Jenna, from South Africa. Thank you so much for, Jenna, and then Laurel from South Africa. Thank you for joining the live stream. We've got 2 more charts to go and 10 minutes to do it, so I've got to pull through these. And a Capricorn stellium. Goodness. So we have in Jennifer's chart, Jennifer, my dear, my darling, we have Uranus, Neptune, Ascendant, Saturn, as well as North Node, all in the first house. Girl, you're here to learn how to be Saturnian. You're here to learn how to be stubborn. You're here to learn how to be cold. You're here to learn how to work for something over time. You're here to learn how to build your identity, to build the brick foundation of your own personal persona. Yeah, I mean, it's really clear. Like, in earlier life, it's tricky because a lot of your chart is based around suppression. Even your sun in Cancer, in the 11th, the idea that even from your friends, from those people who you're supposed to trust, like, you're super secretive. Your emotions in Sag in the 12th, super secretive. Your Mercury, your Venus in the 12th, super secretive. The one thing, 8th house seems to be shining today for some reason. That 8th house, Jupiter in Leo, another placement for business, taxes, estates, entrepreneurship. But to have so much in the first house of self and body, and then to have so much hidden and kind of shuffled away, there's a lot of very interesting themes here that we would need to understand about your chart. Like when you say that you're a Scorpio, darling, you have your sun in Scorpio, which definitely makes you a Scorpio. But I would say that the Capricorn energy of your chart is fiercer. It is more intense. It's where you get, like, people do not know, they do not realize the extent to which you can withdraw from the world, to the extent that you can cast judgment on someone, but also yourself. That's like when you are harsh to others and they just, how could you say that? That's so cold, that's so rude, that's so harsh. You're like, what? I treat myself like that all the time. Now that is not a justification for its rightness, darling, my dear. However, I understand it. And you're really here to turn yourself into the marble of David. You're really here to sculpt yourself. But in order to sculpt yourself, you have to be hard like stone. Yeah? So I think there is this, like, you can get away with some of the hardness, some of the rigidness, some of the defensive tactics and tendencies that I think would be inappropriate for people. I would encourage other people to soften. I would encourage other people to loosen, to not be so hard on themselves. For you, you've told yourself, I am here to be hard on myself. I am here to get it correct. I am not playing around. I am not just whimsically moving through life. I have a plan. I have an intention, and that intention will never be compromised, and I will execute it. And it might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be 10 years from now, but it will be done. And that power, that strength, that fierceness can only really come from a very intense and well-channeled Capricorn. But it does come with some very strict rules. A lot of your earlier life being suppressed, being buried would be a good way to say it, by the gravity of Saturn, made your body physically very weak, very decrepit. But then as you matured and hit your Saturn return, Saturn and Capricorn, they're aspects of astrology that mature like fine wine. They just get better and better with age, and rarer and more valuable, to the point where, after a full life of 60 years, like that's a really pricey bottle. And so that's something to look forward to for sure. Some of the communication stuff, especially in the work environment, people don't necessarily know how to gauge you. Your words will often betray you in a way that you don't intend them to, with Mercury being in the 12th, and then Mars in Gemini retrograde in the 6th. There's this really tricky dynamic with your chart when it comes to work in general, because you've decided to not necessarily be famous right off the bat, and in order to accrue the experiences that you'll need in order to get good at just living life, that North Node in Capricorn in the first, like to forge a solid identity, you're going to need to ruffle feathers. You're going to need to run into walls at full speed, mind you, and that can leave a trail of broken things in your path as you bull in a China shop your way through life. And again, will be difficult as you continue to forge that armor that you've decided to make your main priority this go around. Relationships, not really the goal for you this time around. We also need to understand that you're attracted to somebody who's naturally broken because you feel the need to evoke your healing process this time around. Therefore, you will be attracted to somebody who's also working on their own healing process, or who works in a way who works with people who are healing. The idea of damage being something that your relationship world revolves around, either professionally or personally, and or both. You'd be excellent in real estate because of the finances and numbers. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, with the Jupiter and Leo, you'd be great in real estate. Yeah, I think that's it. Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate your chart very, very much. Thank you, everybody, for your messages. We have one more chart to do, and that is August. August, my good sir, thank you so much for submitting your chart. Let's take a peek. Okay. I can get behind this. Yeah. I was not sure at the beginning, to tell you the truth. August, it's so interesting. You've really decided to put on an Easter egg hunt in your chart. Because at first glance, you have this Mars in Libra, Mars in the sign of his fall, attached to your ascendant. Your ascendant at 16 degrees of Libra gives you the sugar coats to the chart. It's externally beautiful. It's flourished, would be a good way to say it. But to put Mars in Libra so close to the ascendant, Mars is that planet of action. It likes to go forward. It likes to do things now. Yesterday, but now will work too. And then that Mars in Libra, Mars in Libra is an indecisive Mars placement, because Libra is all about options. It's all about balance. It's all about playing devil's advocate. And that Mars in Libra being so close to the ascendant, Mars can't execute when it's in Libra because there are too many options. And so it's this kind of false start mentality that you've decided. And a lot of it is this North Node being here too. You're here to learn how to move forward despite the options at your disposal. One of the things that I have a couple clients with a similar placement, and I'd really like to tell you what I tell them, which is, look, if you make a decision and it doesn't work out, you win, because now you know what option to choose. Yeah? If you throw the spaghetti against the wall and something sticks, great. But if it fails, then that failure just means that it clarified the other options. But if you don't choose and if you don't move forward, then you'll never know. And August, I'm so sorry if you're watching on Instagram. Check it out on Facebook, because Instagram's about to kick me off after an hour of live streaming. So make sure to watch the YouTube video or the Facebook replay for the rest of your reading, because I'll get cut off. But then we have this Venus Cassini in the 11th of friendships, and I really enjoy this placement. So we have Venus, goddess of love, and the sun in Leo, the sun in his home sign of Leo, all regal and shit. In the 11th house of social groups, tribes, and friendships. I really enjoy this. Such a charismatic placement, for sure. Paired with your Libra ascendant, dangerous. You are a little bit too charming, my good sir. And that can definitely work to your disadvantage if not channeled correctly. Because Venus in Leo is backlit, and so it really gives you this very, very intense Leo persona, especially with the ruler of the chart conjunct your sun in the 11th, like the idea that you could be on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, not a convenience store or a house for 50 miles, yeah, and somebody will randomly be driving down the road and will be able to help you, just because that's the kind of charisma that you have. You naturally attract people to you. You are naturally a light in people's lives. However, it can, one of the things that I talk about with clients who have similar placements to these is it can almost feel as if there's a certain amount of astrological nepotism or a fate nepotism in the life, because you have these superficial gifts that make you very attractive, yeah, very radiant, very naturally charming. But is that you? Or is that fate? Or is that just the stars? Like, who are you as a person? What are your gifts? What are you fighting for? And what is it that you are here to bring to the table? And that's where the Easter egg hunt kind of begins in your chart, because we have this Mercury in Virgo, this exalted Mercury in the 12th house of healing, and this lovely, absolutely lovely Jupiter in Sagittarius down in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, and communication. Like, you have the charisma to be an excellent healer, and you're able to convince people of their own wealth and of their own value in a way that I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand this. You don't understand how your words, your perception of people can really instill in them a confidence. Like, part of the Mercury in Virgo exaltation, which you've hidden away in the 12th house of karmic healing, hidden enemies, hospitals, retreats, rehab. It's a very, very sticky house. You've hidden that away. You've hidden kind of the sword in the lake, really. But should you be able to access that Mercury in Virgo, the words that you use have a Pied Piper effect that I think is really fascinating and interesting and useful to a lot of people. However, if you try to work a day job, like if you try to activate this Saturn in Pisces retrograde in your 6th house of work, like bleh. you're truly meant for great things. You're truly meant to inspire. You're truly meant to make a lot of amazing things happen for a lot of people. You're truly meant to change lives. I think that that's beautiful. But I also think that you can't play the muggle. You can't play somebody who's not blessed. You can't play somebody who doesn't have the charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. Like, you can't dull your light. It's physically impossible. Like, it's stamped on you. It's not just skin deep. And so it's just about honoring those things and deciding for yourself how it is you want to use this good. Yeah. I think you should work with crowds. Oh. And Zoom decided to kick me out. So we'll just do the rest of this faceless. Okay. So I think you're supposed to be working with crowds. I think that you're supposed to be really taking charge of the dynamic from a spiritual perspective, and really unlocking some of these deeper placements that you may or may not feel like you have access to at this point. But it's all about learning how to make a decision. It's all about acting first and questioning second, and really exercising and exalting that Mars, which we might need to remediate if you feel a little bit stuck in the indecision limbo. And last thing I wanted to kind of bring up is this moon in Taurus opposing Pluto in Scorpio in the chart, which is a really strong opposition, by the way. And I think that this moon, who is also exalted, you have Sun in Leo, which is properly placed, Jupiter in Leo, which is properly placed, Mercury, who is exalted, and the moon, who is exalted. That's pretty fiery stuff in the chart. But to have Pluto in the second house of finance, and then the moon in Taurus in the 8th house of entrepreneurship and business, just because you don't make money doesn't make you a failure. But when you build a legacy, when you build a business for yourself, I think that there is a certain amount of financial patience that you will need to have. But you also knowing how to be surrounded by the material comforts of life is a skill that you're just aware of. So I don't need to preach to the choir in that department. But as long as you spend resources on things that make you truly comfortable, and you don't go overboard, I think that the material comforts giving you that emotional recharge is okay, because then you'll be able to put that emotion towards greater work. And I don't think it's selfish at all. But halfway through the life, that Pluto will be remediated, and also if we did some Mars remediation, that Mars would kick into your finances and really start to heat things up from a money perspective. Okie dokie. So real quick, let me just get my face on here, just to say goodbye to y'all, because y'all know that I enjoy seeing your faces and you seeing mine. Okay. So, okay, here we are. So thank you everybody very much for joining me for the live stream again. I hope that you have enjoyed our time together. Let's just quickly pull up Facebook. Yep, here we go. And yeah, so this has been another round of the Astro-Babble. If you or somebody you know would like to be added to the list, just private message me their birth date, place, and exact birth time. We will add them to the list. If you would like to schedule a private session, or if you would like to learn astrology, you can always go to my website, which is scorpiorisingastrology.com. Send me a message. Let me know that you're interested in some stuff. Purchase one of the pre-recorded classes and just binge it all day if you're really, craving some astro knowledge. And yeah, until next time, we will be back on Wednesday morning, and may the stars be ever in your favor.